You've tried to network. You've tried to be polite, to be likable, to be yourself. And yet, the doors to power remain closed. The influential ignore you. The successful overlook you. And no matter how hard you try, you remain on the outside watching others rise through connections you cannot access. This is the problem. Because in the real world, success is not just built on talent. It is built on who stands beside you, who speaks your name in rooms you cannot enter, and who decides you are worth their time. So, the real question is not, how do you meet powerful people? The real question is, why would powerful people ever choose you? Listen carefully. Power does not welcome the needy. It does not reward the desperate. And it certainly does not bow to those who beg for attention. Power observes. Power calculates. Power selects. If you wish to move among the influential, you must abandon the illusion that connections are built on kindness or chance. They are not. They are built on strategy, the kind of strategy that understands human ambition better than morality, the kind of strategy that sees relationships not as emotional bonds, but as structures of advantage. This is where most people fail. They approach power with admiration, hoping to be accepted, but admiration without value is noise. And noise is ignored. To rise, you must think differently. You must move differently. You must learn to position yourself in a way that makes powerful people gravitate toward you, without you ever appearing to chase them. These are not polite rules, they are not comfortable truths, but they are effective. Because they are rooted in one understanding. People in power do not connect based on who you are, they connect based on what you represent. And if you can control what you represent, you can control who notices you. And if you can control who notices you, you begin to control your rise. This is how connections with powerful people are truly created, and these are the 13 laws that will show you how. Law 1. Enter through value, not need. Listen carefully, because this is where most people destroy their chances before they even begin. They approach power the wrong way. They walk into rooms, whether physical or digital, carrying nothing but desire. Desire for attention, desire for opportunity, desire to be seen, and in doing so they unknowingly expose their weakness. Because need has a scent. It lingers in the way you speak too quickly, in the way you try too hard to impress, in the subtle urgency behind your words, as if you are asking, without saying it, please choose me. And power despises that, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. Powerful people are surrounded by need. Every day, they are approached by individuals who want something: time, money, influence, validation. To them, desperation is not unique. It is noise, and noise is ignored. So if you enter their world carrying need, you disappear before you are even noticed. Now understand this shift. This is where the game changes. You do not approach power by asking, you approach power by offering. Value is the only language that commands attention in rooms where everyone is already successful. It is not about who you are. It is about what you bring, a solution they haven't considered, an insight they didn't expect, a skill that quietly solves a problem they are too busy to handle. When you carry value, something subtle happens. The dynamic reverses. You are no longer chasing attention. You are creating curiosity. And curiosity is dangerous because it pulls power toward you. But here is where precision matters. Your value must not be loud. It must not scream for recognition, because loud value feels like performance, and performance feels like insecurity. Instead, it must be controlled, almost restrained. You offer just enough to be useful, but not enough to be consumed and forgotten. This creates tension, and tension creates interest, and interest creates access. This is how doors begin to open, not because you knocked, but because something behind that door became aware of you. So, before you ever think about connecting with someone powerful, ask yourself a brutal question. If they gain nothing from you, why would they ever remember you? Because, in the world of power, you are not judged by your intentions, you are not rewarded for your effort. You are measured coldly and instantly by the value you bring the moment you appear. Law 2. Borrow status through association. Watch closely, because power has a pattern. It does not move randomly, it does not scatter itself among the unknown. Power gathers around power. And this is where most people fail to understand the game. They try to climb alone. They try to prove themselves in isolation, believing that talent, effort, or persistence will eventually force the world to notice them. But the truth is far colder than that. The world does not evaluate you from the ground up. It judges you by what surrounds you. Before you speak, before you act, before you prove anything, you are already being measured, not by your potential, but by your proximity. Who stands beside you, who acknowledges you, who allows you into their circle, even briefly, because association creates assumption. If you are seen near influence, you are assumed to carry influence. If you are accepted, even on the edges of powerful circles, you are no longer treated as an outsider. And that single shift changes everything. Understand this clearly. This is not about deception. It is about positioning. You do not need immediate access to the most powerful individuals in the room. That is where amateurs aim and fail. Instead, you move with precision. You align yourself with those who are already connected, those who orbit influence, those who have earned a seat close enough to power that their presence reflects it. These are your entry points. And when you position yourself correctly within these circles, something subtle begins to happen. Your name starts to appear in conversations you were never part of. Your presence becomes familiar even to those who have never spoken to you. And familiarity is a quiet form of power, because people trust what they recognize. Now here is the deeper layer, the part most will never see. You must never appear as someone who is trying to climb, because visible ambition creates resistance. Instead, your presence must feel natural, almost inevitable, as if you belong there, not because you forced your way in, but because your position makes sense. This is how status is borrowed without being questioned. And over time, borrowed status becomes perceived status. Perceived status becomes accepted status, and accepted status becomes real power. So stop trying to rise alone. Because in the world of influence, you are not elevated by what you prove. You are elevated by where you are seen. Law 3. Perception shapes your rank before you speak. Look closely, because this is where judgment happens in silence. Long before you introduce yourself, long before you prove your intelligence, long before you attempt to demonstrate your worth, a decision has already been made about you. And the most dangerous part, you were never part of that decision, because perception does not wait for truth. It forms instantly, coldly, without permission. In the presence of power, people do not analyze you deeply. They scan you, your posture, your pace, your expression, the way your eyes move or avoid, and from these fragments they construct a story. A story about your confidence, your status, your place in the hierarchy. this story becomes your rank before you ever speak a word. Now understand the consequence of this. If you are perceived as uncertain, everything you say will be filtered through doubt. If you are perceived as inferior, even your best ideas will sound smaller than they are. But if you are perceived as composed, controlled, and self-assured, your words gain weight before they are even heard. This is the invisible advantage of perception, and this is where most people lose the game. They focus on what to say while ignoring how they are seen. They prepare sentences but neglect presence, and presence is what power responds to first, because powerful people do not have time to discover your value slowly. They rely on signals fast, instinctive, efficient, so you must learn to control those signals, not with arrogance, not with exaggeration, but with precision. Your movements must be deliberate, never rushed. Your gaze steady, never searching for approval. Your silence comfortable, never anxious, because hesitation reveals insecurity, and insecurity lowers your perceived rank instantly. Now here is the deeper truth, the part few understand. You are not trying to impress. Impressing is loud, and loud invites scrutiny. Instead, you are creating a quiet certainty, a presence that suggests you are already familiar with power, already comfortable in its presence, already someone who belongs. When you achieve this, something subtle shifts in the room. People begin to treat you differently, not because they know you, but because they have decided who you are. And once that decision is made, it is rarely questioned. So remember this, because it will define your rise. You do not enter powerful circles and earn your place over time. You enter, and your place is assigned to you instantly by perception. Law 4. Power respects control, not emotion. Pay attention, because this is where most people quietly disqualify themselves. Not through lack of talent, not through lack of opportunity, but through lack of control. Emotion is natural, but in the presence of power, what is natural is often what is punished. Watch closely in any room where influence exists. The ones who rise are not the loudest. They are not the most expressive. They are not the ones desperate to be understood. They are the ones who remain composed, because emotion, when visible, becomes information, and information can be used. Every reaction you display, frustration, excitement, insecurity, eagerness, it reveals something about your position. It tells others what affects you, what controls you, where your weaknesses lie. And once that is known, you are no longer unpredictable. You are manageable. This is why powerful people value restraint, not because they feel less, but because they reveal less. Their anger is measured, their enthusiasm is contained, their approval is rare, and therefore valuable. They understand a simple truth: the more you react, the less power you hold. Now consider the opposite. A person who remains calm under pressure, who does not rush to respond, who does not seek validation through emotional display, this person becomes difficult to read. And what cannot be easily read cannot be easily controlled. This creates an aura, subtle but undeniable. An aura of authority, because control suggests strength. It signals that you are not driven by impulse, but by intention. And intention is what power trusts, but do not misunderstand this. Control is not coldness. It is not the absence of emotion. It is the discipline to decide when emotion is shown and how much is revealed, because strategic emotion can influence, but uncontrolled emotion exposes, and exposure lowers your position instantly. So when you step into spaces where influence exists, Observe yourself carefully. Your tone, your reactions, your impulses to speak, to prove, to respond too quickly. Each one is a test. And most fail it without ever realizing, because in the world of power, you are not respected for how strongly you feel. You are respected for how completely you control what others are allowed to see. Law 5. Never outshine the power you seek. Understand this, because it is one of the most dangerous mistakes you can make in the presence of power. You believe that to rise you must shine. You believe that to be noticed you must stand out. You believe that your brilliance, your intelligence, your capability, if displayed boldly enough, will earn admiration. But in the world of power, admiration is not always what you receive. Sometimes it is something far more dangerous. Threat. Powerful people do not fear weakness. They do not feel challenged by those beneath them. But the moment you appear too capable, too sharp, too impressive, you trigger something instinctive. A silent calculation. Is this person useful, or are they a future problem? And if that question leans even slightly toward danger, distance is created. Access is restricted. Opportunities quietly disappear, not because you lacked value, but because you displayed it without control. This is the paradox most never understand. Your strength must be visible, but never overwhelming. Your intelligence must be clear, but never dominant. Because the moment you overshadow the very power you are trying to approach, you are no longer seen as an ally. You are seen as competition, and power does not nurture competition. It eliminates it or avoids it entirely. Now observe those who move skillfully in these circles. They are capable, often more capable than they appear. But they reveal themselves gradually. They allow the powerful to feel intelligent, to feel in control, to feel superior without ever being challenged. This is not submission, this is strategy. Because when a powerful person feels secure in your presence, when they feel that you enhance their image rather than threaten it, they begin to lower their guard. And when the guard lowers, access increases, trust forms, influence grows. But here is where precision becomes critical. You must never appear weak. Weakness invites dismissal. Instead, you operate in a controlled balance, strong enough to be respected, subtle enough to never provoke insecurity. And over time, as trust deepens and your position stabilizes, you can reveal more of your true capability carefully, strategically, at the right moment. Because by then, you are no longer an outsider trying to impress. You are an insider who has already been accepted. So remember this, because it will protect your rise. In the presence of power, it is not the brightest flame that survives. It is the one that knows exactly how much light to reveal and when to dim itself. Law 6. Study their desires, not their words. Pay attention, because this is where deception becomes invisible. Most people listen the wrong way. They hear words and assume truth lives inside them. They take statements at face value, believing that what is spoken is what is meant. But in the presence of power, words are rarely truth. They are masks, carefully constructed, socially acceptable, strategically filtered masks. Powerful people do not always say what they want. In fact, they often cannot afford to, because desire is vulnerability. And vulnerability, when exposed, becomes leverage. So instead, they hide it behind opinions, behind priorities, behind distractions that sound important but reveal nothing. And this is where most fail. They listen to what is said instead of watching what is pursued. But desire does not lie in language. it reveals itself in behavior, what they return to again and again, what captures their attention without effort, what they protect without explanation. These are the real signals. Because desire is repetitive, it circles back. It resurfaces in different forms, even when denied. Now understand the deeper layer. If you only respond to words, you will always be slightly behind reality. But if you learn to read desire, you move ahead of it. You begin to see the pattern before it becomes obvious. A powerful individual may speak about discipline, but consistently reward creativity. They may claim to value loyalty, but repeatedly engage with those who bring advantage. They may insist on structure, yet gravitate toward those who offer solutions under pressure. Words say one thing, behavior reveals another, and behavior is where truth hides. This is where influence begins. Because once you understand what someone actually wants, not what they claim to want, you no longer need to guess how to position yourself. You align directly with the hidden current beneath their words. And when you align with hidden desire, you become essential without being obvious. But there is a warning hidden inside this law. You must never reveal that you are observing too closely, because people tolerate attention but not analysis. So your understanding must remain silent, invisible, almost instinctive in appearance. You respond naturally, as if you simply get it. No explanation. No demonstration of insight, just precision in action, and over time something shifts. People begin to feel that you understand them better than they understand themselves. Not because you speak more, but because you see more. And in the world of power, those who see desire clearly eventually gain the ability to shape it. Law 7. Control your image ruthlessly. Listen closely, because in the world of power, you are never encountered directly. You are always encountered as a story about you. Before you enter a room, before you speak, before you even have the chance to prove anything, something else arrives first. Your reputation, and reputation is not truth. It is distilled perception, compressed, repeated, and accepted without verification. This is where most people lose control of their rise. They live as if their actions are enough, as if competence alone will eventually be recognized. As if reality corrects perception over time, it does not. Reality is slow, perception is fast, and in power structures, speed decides authority. So, what others believe about you begins to matter more than what you actually are. If they believe you are unreliable, your best work becomes questionable. If they believe you are powerful, even your silence carries weight. This is the hidden architecture of influence. And once it is formed, it resists change. Now understand the danger. One careless moment can rewrite everything. One emotional reaction, one misjudged comment, one public weakness seen by the wrong eyes, and suddenly the version of you that others relied on begins to collapse. Not because you changed, but because your image did. Powerful circles are especially sensitive to this. They do not evaluate you repeatedly. They assign you a category and then treat you accordingly. Trustworthy, unstable, useful, replaceable. Once assigned, the label becomes sticky. This is why image must be controlled with precision, not emotion. You do not reveal everything. You do not explain everything. You do not allow every moment of your life to become public interpretation. Instead, you construct consistency, a controlled narrative that reinforces the same impression again and again. Calm, competent, deliberate, reliable under pressure, not exaggerated, not loud, not unstable in its presentation. Because inconsistency creates doubt, and doubt spreads faster than truth ever can. Now here is the darker truth few admit. You will not be judged by who you are in private. You will be judged by what survives in public perception, and once that perception stabilizes, people begin to see confirmation everywhere. Your image becomes self-reinforcing. They interpret your actions through it, not outside of it, and at that point, you are no longer managing impressions. Your impressions are managing you, so protect it, shape it, and never forget, in the world of influence, you are not defined by your reality. You are defined by the version of you that others are allowed to believe. Law 8. Use scarcity to increase your value. You listen carefully, because this law is where value is quietly manufactured. Most people destroy their worth without ever realizing it. They think availability is kindness. They think being always present creates connection. They think quick responses build importance. But in the presence of power, constant availability does not signal loyalty. It signals replaceability, because anything that is always accessible is assumed to have low demand. And anything with low demand is treated with low priority. This is the hidden psychology of attention. What is rare is assumed to be valuable. What is frequent is assumed to be ordinary. And powerful people, whether they admit it or not, operate through this instinct. They assign weight based on scarcity. Now observe how most people behave. They reply instantly. They over-explain. They make themselves constantly reachable, constantly present, constantly there. And in doing so, they remove tension from their presence. But tension is where value lives. When something is not immediately accessible, the mind begins to assign it importance. It starts to wonder, it starts to anticipate, it starts to assign meaning where none was given, and that psychological gap is where perception forms. Now understand this shift clearly. You are not trying to disappear. You are not withdrawing out of fear. You are controlling exposure, because overexposure destroys hierarchy. When you are everywhere, you are no longer significant anywhere. But when your presence is selective, intentional, measured, it begins to carry weight. Powerful people respect what does not revolve around them, not consciously, but instinctively, because scarcity suggests independence, and independence suggests strength. And strength is always more valuable than availability, so you begin to regulate your presence, not by absence alone, but by precision. You appear when it matters, you respond when it is necessary, you engage when it creates impact, and in between those moments you are not missing, you are simply not accessible. This creates a subtle psychological shift in how you are perceived. Your attention becomes something that must be earned, not assumed. And what must be earned is always treated with more respect. But there is a deeper layer most never understand. Scarcity is not just about time, it is about emotional distance. When you are not emotionally predictable, people pay closer attention. When they cannot assume your reaction, they value your response more. So you become measured, controlled, intentional in your engagement, and slowly, without force, your presence begins to feel limited in supply. And in the world of power, what is limited is always perceived as essential. Law 9. Build strategic dependence, pay attention, because this is where connection turns into control. Most people misunderstand relationships with powerful individuals. They believe closeness is enough. They believe familiarity creates importance. They believe being liked guarantees security. But in the world of power, none of that is stable. because liking someone does not make them necessary, and what is not necessary can be removed without hesitation. Now understand the difference that changes everything. There is being present in someone's circle, and there is being required inside it. One is replaceable, the other is structural. Powerful people do not retain those who are simply agreeable. They retain those who become part of their functioning system, those who solve friction, those who reduce effort, those who eliminate problems before they are even spoken. This is where strategic dependence begins. Not emotional dependence, not manipulation, but functional necessity. You position yourself in a way that quietly integrates into their workflow, their decisions, their outcomes. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently, so that over time your absence is no longer neutral. It creates disruption, and disruption is what power avoids. Now observe the psychological shift this creates. At first you are evaluated, then you are tolerated, then you are relied upon, and once reliance begins, perception changes permanently, because now you are no longer just a person in their environment. You are part of its stability, but this must be done with precision. If you try to force importance, you become a liability. If you demand recognition, you become replaceable again. Strategic dependence is silent. It is built through repeated usefulness, not declared importance. You solve what others overlook. You anticipate what others delay. You simplify what others complicate. And slowly, without announcement, you become the path of least resistance. And in power structures, the path of least resistance is always preferred. But here is the darker truth beneath it all. Once someone depends on you structurally, their perception of you changes. Not because you have changed, but because your removal now has consequences, and anything that creates consequences becomes harder to discard. This is how proximity becomes protection, not through loyalty but through function, not through emotion but through necessity. So remember this carefully. You are not trying to be appreciated. You are trying to become something that, if removed, would leave behind a problem that cannot be ignored. Law 10. Align with power trends early. Pay attention, because power does not rise evenly. It moves like a tide, quiet at first, then unstoppable. And most people only react when they are already drowning in what they failed to notice. They arrive late. They arrive when the structure is already built, when the hierarchy is already formed, when the names have already been written into influence. And at that point, all they can do is follow. But following is not power. Following is survival. Now understand what the intelligent rarely admit aloud. Power is never created suddenly. It is always forming in silence, long before the world recognizes it. A conversation here, a small alliance there, a rising idea dismissed by most as irrelevant, a person underestimated repeatedly until they are not. These are the early signals, and only those who study movement, not success, can see them, because success is the announcement, but movement is the origin. Most people wait for confirmation. They wait for validation from the world before they commit their attention, before they align, before they choose sides, but by then the outcome is already decided. Now observe how power actually consolidates. It does not ask for loyalty at the peak. It rewards those who were present at the beginning, those who supported when it was uncertain, those who aligned when it was unproven, those who moved before certainty existed. This early alignment creates something irreversible. Not loyalty but belonging, because once power stabilizes, it remembers proximity during formation more than admiration after success. And this is where most miscalculate everything. They chase what is already visible. They attach themselves to what is already strong. They compete for attention inside systems that are already closed. But strategic minds do something colder. They identify what is forming, not what is formed. They position themselves near emerging influence while it is still vulnerable, still shaping its identity, still open to alliance. And in doing so, they become part of its foundation, not an addition, a component. Now here is the psychological shift that follows. When something you supported early rises, your value rises with it, not because you changed, but because your timing cannot be rewritten. And timing in power is irreversible currency. So remember this clearly: the world rewards those who arrive first to success, but it obeys those who arrived first to power. Law 11. Avoid emotional exposure. Pay attention, because this is where power begins to study you. Not through your achievements, not through your words, but through your reactions, because emotion is information. And information in the wrong hands becomes control. Most people believe expressing themselves openly builds trust. They think sharing frustration, excitement, fear, or insecurity makes them relatable. But in the presence of influence, emotional exposure does something very different. It lowers your position without a single word being spoken against you. Now understand how the room really works. Powerful individuals are not just listening to what you say. They are mapping how easily you can be moved. What upsets you, what excites you, what destabilizes your focus, what pulls you out of control. Every visible reaction becomes a data point. And once your emotional patterns are understood, you are no longer unpredictable. You are readable. And what is readable is manageable. This is where many lose their advantage without realizing it. A moment of anger reveals pressure points. A moment of desperation reveals dependency. A moment of excitement reveals craving for approval. A moment of insecurity reveals where influence can enter. And influence never forces its way in. It waits for access. Now observe those who remain untouched by volatility. They do not react quickly. They do not display urgency. They do not allow every internal shift to become external expression. Instead, they absorb, they process, they respond only when it serves direction, not emotion. This creates something subtle but powerful. Uncertainty, because people cannot easily predict them, and unpredictability creates psychological distance. And distance creates respect. But this is not suppression, it is control. A controlled presence suggests stability, and stability is interpreted as strength. Now here is the deeper layer most never recognize. When you stop revealing emotional reactions too freely, people begin to project their own interpretations onto you. They fill the silence with assumptions. They assign depth where there may be none. They attribute strength where restraint is simply discipline. And over time, perception elevates you without effort. But once emotion leaks too often, the illusion collapses. Because power does not trust what it can easily influence. So remember this carefully: in the presence of influence, your emotions are not just feelings. They are signals, and the fewer signals you emit, the harder you become to read, and the more difficult you become to control. Law 12. Give small wins before asking big favors. Listen closely, because this is where ambition either becomes accepted or rejected permanently. Most people approach power with urgency. They arrive with their request already formed, their timing already decided, their need already visible in their voice, and in doing so they trigger resistance before the conversation even begins. Because powerful people are not moved by urgency, they are overwhelmed by it. Every day they are surrounded by demands, requests, expectations, people trying to extract something from their time, their influence, their attention. So when someone arrives asking for something large, something important, something that requires risk or effort, the instinct is not consideration. It is defense. Now understand how access is actually created. It is not through bold requests. It is through controlled progression. You do not begin by asking for weight. You begin by removing it. A small problem solved without being asked. A useful insight delivered at the right moment. A connection made easier. A friction quietly reduced. These are not grand gestures. They are strategic signals. Signals that say, I am not here to take from you. I am here to reduce what takes from you. And this changes everything, because now you are no longer categorized as demand. You are categorized as relief. And relief is remembered differently. It does not create tension. It creates openness. Now observe the psychological shift that follows. After a few small wins, something subtle happens inside the other person's perception. You begin to occupy a different category in their mind. Not stranger, not outsider, not requester, but contributor. And contributors are not evaluated the same way as others. They are listened to longer, they are interrupted less, they are questioned less aggressively, and most importantly, they are trusted more quickly. But here is where precision becomes critical. These early contributions must feel natural, almost incidental, never transactional, never performative, because once intention becomes obvious, value collapses into manipulation. And manipulation closes doors instead of opening them. So you move quietly, consistently, without announcing your strategy. And over time, accumulation replaces persuasion. Because now, when you finally make a request, it is no longer the first impression. It is not an interruption. It is a continuation of a pattern already accepted. And what is already accepted feels far less risky to grant. So remember this carefully. In the world of power, you do not ask for the door to open. You first make the room comfortable enough that opening it feels natural. Law 13. Exit before you are dismissed. Pay attention, because this is where most people unknowingly erase their own value. Not by failing, not by losing, but by staying too long. There is a moment in every interaction with power that almost no one recognizes in real time. A moment when interest begins to fade, when attention slightly shifts, when curiosity becomes familiarity, and familiarity, in the world of influence, is the beginning of decline. Because what is fully understood is no longer studied, and what is no longer studied is no longer valued the same way. Now, observe how most people behave in that moment. They stay, they continue speaking, they try to extend the interaction. They attempt to reinforce their presence, hoping to recover the original impression, but in doing so, they cross an invisible threshold. From presence into excess, and excess always lowers value. Power does not reject people loudly, it disengages quietly. A delayed response, a shorter reply, a shifted tone, a subtle loss of attention that is never announced, only felt. And yet most ignore it. They confuse politeness with interest. They confuse access with importance. They confuse being tolerated with being valued, and that confusion is costly, because value is not only created by what you do, it is preserved by knowing when to stop. Now understand the psychology beneath this law. Human perception is strongest at the beginning and the end. The middle fades, which means your exit. It is just as important as your entry. A strong presence that overstays becomes diluted, but a strong presence that leaves early becomes amplified in memory. It creates unfinished psychological space. And the mind fills unfinished space with significance. Now observe those who understand this principle instinctively. They do not linger after their impact is made. They do not over-explain their value. They do not attempt to secure validation through repetition. Instead, they recognize completion, and they leave at the moment of highest clarity, not lowest interest. This creates something powerful, anticipation, because absence after impact is not emptiness, it is reinforcement. People begin to replay the interaction, to reassess the presence, to assign more meaning than was originally given. And over time, your memory becomes sharper than your presence ever was. But here is the deeper truth few understand. Those who stay too long are not remembered more. They are remembered less accurately because repetition dilutes distinction. So remember this carefully in the presence of power. You are not valued for how long you remain. You are valued for knowing the exact moment your presence should end before it begins to decline.